Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another guide for Grim Soul Survival. Today, I plan on discussing kind of some more intermediate tactics, as well as copper farming. Things like the double auto technique, which I briefly discussed at the end of my beginner's guide, as well as kind of what levels you should be doing some of these things. Some of the major benchmarks are obviously level 23 for the one-handed sword, level 31, which you unlock a bunch of things I'll discuss, and level 40, which unlocks tier 3 armor. I'll be discussing how to go for tier 2 loot caches, why you would go for tier 2 loot caches. I'll be discussing full clears, and making bronze, as well as dealing with the knights that are in these tier 2 zones. Not in that particular order necessarily, but we'll get to all of those subjects. Now again, with most of my guides, I will be talking pretty much for the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll get into the actual map and do the things. So, if you don't particularly want to watch me or listen to me talk or whatever, you just want to watch me go in and do the things that I need to do in the tier 2 zone, feel free to skip ahead to when I actually get into the zone. Now then, intermediate farming. What is it and what does it entail? Basically, intermediate farming is the period during which you're beyond the basic beginner things that I laid out in my beginner's guide, which is basically, only exclusively going around the edges of a zone to grab the resources and such. Because eventually, sooner or later, you need to go in and get the things from the loot caches in the middle of the zone, obviously. And I mentioned that in my beginner's guide. You basically want to, at the start of the game, you want to make runs and decide ahead of time whether or not you're just going to go straight for the loot caches and not worry about the resources on the edges of the zone, or if you're just going to go and get the resources around the edges of the zone and not worry about the loot caches in the middle. Now that is still obviously a preferred method, even in intermediate farming to an extent. However, eventually you will be making this leather pack. The leather pack obviously unlocks at level 55, and for me, the leather pack kind of signifies the end of intermediate gameplay and the beginning of the advanced gameplay. Because once you have that leather pack, a lot of things open up to you. But we will get there. So, when should you start farming for copper? That's one of the main questions that a lot of people ask me, or have asked me in the past, is when should I start farming for copper? Where should I farm for copper? How should I go about it? And my answer is, in terms of where you want to do copper, right here, the tier 2 stone zone. That is the place for copper, guys. The tier 2 zone has something like 72 total copper in the actual zone itself, and of course if you manage to kill a couple of AIs, they may have copper on them, so you can easily come back with anywhere between 3 to 4 full stacks of copper, or which when you melt it down turns into, let me see, well, if you have between 60 and 80, that would be 30 and 40 copper ingots. So, as long as you don't use a lot in your runs, obviously you want to have a one-handed sword for this. So the minimum level, I would say, for copper farming is probably 23, because you need to be able to make one-handed swords. You can get the copper that you need to make one-handed swords in these tier 1 skull zones. It's very, very possible to do it that way. There's not a lot of copper in there. It's something like 12 copper per map. But obviously, at the beginning, you're going to want to go in there. You're going to need stone anyway. You're going to need stone and planks to upgrade your base to level 2, so hopefully you've been making those runs to the stone zone, the tier 1 stone zones, and getting a little bit of copper every single time while doing that. I discussed at the end of my beginner's video, guys, I discussed double auto, and what it is, what it's doing, and why it's effective, obviously. It's essentially, in a way, a replacement for stutter step. It's not 100% as effective as real stutter step, but in terms of farming resources, it is probably just as effective, and in some ways it's even more effective. It is the reason why I've gone ahead and turned on my my touch feedback thing. So, because when I go into the tier 2 zone here, guys, I'm going to be using double auto almost exclusively for farming resources. Now I'm going to go in here, guys, and we're going to discuss a couple things. Obviously, again, the one-handed sword is a pretty big prerequisite for doing these kinds of runs. And it's partially to do with dealing with the enemies that you've dealt with in tier 1. The one-handed sword has 30 damage, and more importantly, it has 72 durability. With the 30 damage, if you do a sneak attack on a leper or a wolf, that's a one-shot. They're dead. They're gone. With a one-shot with the sneak damage. So you can see, obviously, if you can one-shot enemies, then a one-handed sword potentially, not realistically, but potentially, can kill 72 enemies over the course of its lifetime, which is a pretty big deal. It can obviously do a lot of work for you and last a very long time. And it is still very much today the farming standard weapon that I generally tend to bring. Obviously, the attack speed is 1, so stutter step isn't super amazing on it, but it can be done. So what are some of the other kind of benchmarks? Like, when should you really consider doing heavy copper farming? Well, I would say level 31 is a pretty decent time to start thinking about it. Let me go ahead and flip my notebook over to there. And yeah, so level 31, you're gonna unlock the Morningstar. Now, the Morningstar isn't a great weapon, in my opinion, mainly because it requires these nails. But it can be a very effective weapon. Obviously, it's 34 damage and 1.1 attack speed. So if you happen to already have some nails, it wouldn't be terrible to use. Later on, it's going to be a very important benchmark because we will be able to use the simple bow at level 31. With 20 damage and 1.1 attack speed, it seems like it'll be a pretty decent ranged weapon option. And then also at level 31 is when you unlock the Bitter Tincture, which is a full heal item. In my beginner's guide, I kind of mention, both in my outdated one and in my revised one, well, I think I mentioned it in my revised one. I may have glossed over it. I mentioned in one of them at least, that mostly hollyberries, you want to just go ahead and eat them. Because they're not really used for much. This is the only item in the game that hollyberries are used for, guys, is Bitter Tinctures. And obviously, in order to make the Bitter Tincture, you need spirits. Spirits are made with the Herbalist's Table, which also unlocks at level 31. If I am not mistaken, yes, there it is, okay. So, obviously, at this point, guys, hopefully you've got at least somewhat of a decent stockpile of food. If you're not really that concerned with making or reserving your spirits and your empty vials for making the mandrake tincture down here, because again, mandrake seeds can only be found generally in the night caches, which are exclusive to the tier 3 zones at night, and there you'll have to deal with knights and templars and AIs with scimitars and bastard swords and all of that nasty stuff. So I don't blame you if you guys don't want to necessarily reserve them for that. Generally, I find now that I get way more vials than I do mandrake seeds, so it's fine to go ahead and make a couple of bitter tinctures, especially at the start when you might be otherwise lacking some really good healing items. You may not have stockpiled a whole bunch of honey by then. So at level 31, you may want to consider, relying a little bit more on your cooked food and saving the holly berries in order to make bitter tinctures. Now at level 35, that's one of the benchmarks that you really need to be concerned with, because that's when you can unlock the flanged mace. And if you're interested at all in doing the dungeon or fighting knights really efficiently, then the flanged mace here is the weapon of choice. For the dungeon especially, and also for knights because of that attack speed, and the damage, of course. You can do stutter step much more efficiently against knights and really up your DPS. So, beyond that, I believe the kettle hat and the copper hauberk also unlock at level 35. However, the leggings do not unlock until level 40. So that is something that you probably want to be aware of. I wouldn't recommend using a ton of this copper armor. I definitely wouldn't bother making the kettle hat. And actually, this is something I'm pretty sure I mentioned in my beginner's guide, my original one, that is. That if you make the chest and the leggings, which is of course why I only ever wear chest and leggings, generally the chest and leggings of any particular armor set give you about 66% of that armor set's full armor value. That is to say, the amount of armor that all of these items combined would give you. So just these two give you about 66% of that value. However, if you look at the various materials you need for the other things, like, they only give you 33% of the rest of the armor, essentially, but they cost so much leather, so much thick cloth, you could just make these and get that. So the general benchmark has been, for me, or my general rule of thumb, is that I only make chests and leggings because I get about 66% of the total armor set's armor, but only for about half the cost of what it would take for me to make the entire armor set. Now, some people, they just want the additional armor. I understand you want to limit the amount of damage taken, but at the same time, you're using a lot of your resources for armor to reduce your damage taken by a very minimal amount, in my opinion, at least. So that is, that's kind of my opinion on armor. Everybody has their own different opinion, but a lot of people understand that the chest and leggings are the most efficient uses of materials in order to get a large amount of armor. And you definitely want to do that moving forward, certainly. Now, obviously, I'm only wearing Tier 1 armor. With the 50 armor that it provides, knights, their normal attack value is 49, but with the 50 armor, they'll only hit you for 37. So before, they would essentially almost two-shot you. Now, with this armor on, you can take 2 shots comfortably, but a third will definitely kill you. However, if you are using your healing items effectively, then, if you've popped 1 or 2 of these leeks or whatever you might use, berry juice, jerky, steaks, whatever, if you pop 1 or 2 of those, either before you start fighting a knight or during the fight with a knight, then you should be able to take 3 hits. But yeah, that is, that's the reason why we're bringing this armor, pretty much, is just to deal with knights. Everything else, The direwolves can kind of hurt, but they don't necessarily require you to use a bunch of armor to deal with them. Whereas knights, they hit so hard that you really should be wearing some armor in order to deal with them. I mean, some people prefer tier 2 armor, but I think tier 1 is all that's absolutely necessary to deal with knights. So, where are the knights in the map? The knights in the map are generally there's generally 2 of them, from my experience. One will be in the middle, where most of the loot caches are, and one is kind of somewhere around the outside, so you have to be somewhat careful. So we're going to hop in here now, guys, and I'm going to show you basically how I farm for copper, and it's going to be very similar to the way that I do or the way that I showed you in my beginner's guide, which is I'm just going to go around the edges. However, we do have to take into account that there are enemies around the edges that could be very dangerous to us, mainly the knights. So this is a situation where we've got a leper here, and he's guarding about 5 different things here. I can just sneak up on him and one-shot him. Leek seeds, yeah, I probably want to take leek seeds. Now, unlike general farming in a tier 1 zone, if you're coming here to farm pretty much exclusively for copper, you don't want to fill up your bag with a ton of other stuff. Now, if you only have the tier 1 bag, then you pretty much just want to come here and only get copper. I'm going to organize my inventory a little bit here. I like to organize it very specifically. So you can kind of see this whole row I generally allocate for stone, and this whole row I would generally allocate for copper. And then this is just for food items as well as leather. However, if you don't have the leather backpack, you don't have that bottom row, you still need the food, and you're obviously here for the copper, so you may have to sacrifice other things. Obviously, you need a little bit of room for wood. You have to have wood, because otherwise you can't craft replacement pickaxes. Now I'm going to go ahead and use this leper and show off that you can use double auto to actually attack as a replacement for stutter step. So we do it that way. That wasn't a super great example, but the spiked mace here, which I just happen to have, has an attack speed of 1.3. I'll switch to the one-handed sword here to better show off how you can use this as a replacement for stutter step. But the higher the attack speed of the weapon, obviously. Ooh, I don't want to deal with AIs in this particular guide for you guys, so I'm just gonna get out of there. But the higher the attack speed of the weapon, again, the more. Hold on, my mic may have shifted a bit here. Hopefully that hasn't been making my voice all echoey for the past like minute or two. But obviously, the higher the attack speed of the weapon, as I've explained before, the more efficient stutter stepping is. You can do more with the stutter step and increase your attack speed pretty significantly. So, you know, with the spiked mace, using the double auto technique to essentially do stutter step anyway, it's going to be very quick. You're just going to have to be kind of tapping the auto button like mad. So again, normally in tier 1 farming, I would just go ahead and grab these flax fiber. But in a tier 2 zone like this, when I'm going for copper, I often find that I really don't have the room for those things, so I don't even bother. And if you don't have the leather pack yet, then you're especially going to be very low on room. You may not even bother to get stone here. I bother to get stone here because, again, my base is not fully developed as of yet. And having the leather pack, I can manage to take it all back home with me. But until you have that leather pack, you're pretty much going to be coming to the Tier 2 Stone Zone almost exclusively to farm for copper. Now, some people believe that the Tier 2 zone is obviously better in terms of what you can get loot-wise from the loot caches, and to a certain extent, they are right. Now, I'm only going around the edges of the map right now to collect stone and copper and wood. So, okay, well, this is a... That was a decent opportunity there to show you that the double auto trick can be used as a replacement for stutter step. I managed to kill that damned and only take one hit in return, which is pretty much how those fights went in the past when stutter step was kind of OP. So it kind of shows you that even though stutter step has been nerfed to an extent, it's not so badly that, you know, we can't farm somewhat close to the way we used to. It's just very funky. But the Tier 2 loot caches, they do have better loot. However, I would argue that the loot that you can get from a Tier 2 loot cache is only marginally better than what you would get in a Tier 1 loot cache. Obviously, there are some things that are very, very rare in a Tier 1 loot cache, and they are a bit more common in a Tier 1 loot cache, or a Tier 2 loot cache, rather. But, again, you also have to take into account what it takes to actually get the loot cache. Because, and I say loot cache rather than chest or whatever, because they're actually different based on the zone. In the Tier 1 zones, the loot caches are just little sacks that are kind of on the ground. Whereas in a Tier 2 zone, they are actually baskets. And then, of course, in the Tier 3 zone, they are actually full-blown chests. I did a terrible job of doing double auto there, but oh well. Hopefully I will show off enough examples of decent double auto attacks that you'll get the general idea, regardless. But yeah, the Tier 2 loot caches, they're significantly better guarded. Not necessarily in terms of the quality of the enemies that are around it, but more in just the sheer number of enemies that are around it. With the increase in the number of enemies, you really can't get a lot of sneak attacks in, so you just kind of have to fight them straight up. And I keep losing track of the number of times I've hit these copper nodes. But because of that, it's very wow, that's 3 AIs now that have had pitchforks. Interesting. The Tier 2 AIs obviously have different loadouts. Pitchforks are actually pretty good weapons. I would definitely, if you are well stocked in terms of food, I would definitely recommend fighting a couple of AIs if they have pitchforks or ores. I'm actually saving most of my ores because we believe they will be necessary in crafting the boat way down the line. We don't think the boat is anywhere close to being ready to be released, but, you know, it doesn't hurt to have the stuff ahead of time. But yeah, the ores and the pitchforks are pretty good weapons with decent range. They're kind of similar to the Carthill, except they have much faster attack rates. So they are, in my opinion, much better to use for more difficult fights against things like knights or in the dungeon. I've been using a lot of pitchforks in the dungeon against Forsaken, which are kind of an upgraded knight to a certain extent. Speaking of knights, I do need to find one eventually here. But yeah, you can see with the one-handed sword, using sneak attacks, we can very easily, you know, one-shot certain things. And it can make your life pretty easy in certain aspects. I also want to show off kind of what is generally going to be guarding Tier 2 loot caches. Just as soon as I am done getting my Kappa O. And I will actually show you guys how I would go about getting to the Tier 2 loot caches as well. I may or may not reset the zone to do that, depending on how many enemies are present. So obviously there you can see there's a loot cache right up there, and it is surrounded by 5 enemies. Now the one in the lower left corner there, which I can't identify just yet, that one probably wouldn't get aggroed if you come at the loot cache from the top right, but for the most part you're going to have to fight at least 4 of those enemies, maybe more, just to get that one loot cache. And unlike in a Tier 1 zone, most of them aren't going to be lepers. Let me sneak up in here. We have a bear, a damned, a direwolf, and another damned. So they're all fairly advanced enemies. And also there is another guy up here. Let me just go ahead and get some more stone. Oh, that's another direwolf. Yeah, that's not exactly an easy enemy to go through. And let me see what we have up here. I'm lagging a little bit, which is unfortunate. So I've got a couple of lepers. That leper actually spotted me. I guess I'll just drag him away, and we will... I mean, it's only 2 enemies, and another one up top to the left that are potentially between me and 5 resource nodes. So... yeah, I would go ahead and probably... Wow! Okay, lag. PowerPoint presentation. It's probably because I'm recording with the touch thing on. But yeah, this is a situation whereby, yeah, there's not that many enemies, and especially if I can, like, one-shot them, I might as well, and that will help me get more resources. Holy crap, lag. What does he have? A dagger? Yeah, it looks like a dagger. That's not really worth me killing him for. But I guess there's not really much else to talk about now. It's just the Tier 2 loot caches, full clears, and how to make bronze. So bronze is kind of a big thing more in late game. However, it's definitely something you need to make a little bit of in intermediate gameplay, because you need some bronze in order to make your leather pack. You need 2 bronze ingots, and of course if you die, you're going to have to make 2 more bronze ingots in order to get your leather pack back. I'm still working out the timing for doing the double auto with a one-handed sword. It's a little slower than I would like, so I'm not quite that good with the timing just yet. But it's still decent. But yeah, you can see I'm getting into the center of the zone here, and like there is just red everywhere. That is the main difference between a Tier 1 zone and a Tier 2 zone. In a Tier 2 zone, you get towards the middle, and it is just red everywhere. There are enemies all over the place. Now, they're not all gonna be like knights or anything like that, but, you know, you deal with enough damned all at once, and they might as well be knights. So... guess I'll go ahead and take the scroll, which was something I already had. Another thing is, much like the Tier 1 zones that I don't like about the Tier 2 zones, is that the loot caches can be spread out pretty significantly. Okay, well, I attracted the attention of the knight, so I guess I'll go ahead and show you kind of how I like to fight the knight. I do not use double auto on a knight. I think it's a bad idea. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and eat a leek, I want to hit him, and then I want to kind of get another... Well, that wasn't a very great example, but I kind of want to take a step back so I can get out of his range and start another attack and then get out of range again before he starts his second attack. That is the general idea of it, but unfortunately I'm getting some lag, so it's a little bit difficult. It's a lot easier also with a weapon with higher attack speed. So for example, if I switch to the spiked mace, it has a little bit lower damage overall, but it should be easier to do what I'm trying to do here. Eh, maybe not. Maybe the attack range isn't that great, so that may also be another factor. What's the attack range on it? 1.4. And what is the attack range on the one-handed sword? 1.5. Okay, so yeah, it's probably not super great. But yeah, you can see fighting a knight is very it's very resource intensive. It'll take up a lot of your food. Or if you don't want to take up a lot of food, it's going to require you to use a lot more of your very good armor. I'm lagging way too much to show you an effective fight against a knight, unfortunately, guys, so I'm just going to have to deal with this guy how I can deal with this guy. The lag is just ridiculous. But you do want to fight knights eventually. I wouldn't necessarily say in the intermediate part of the game. However, you obviously saw I took the nails as well as the saltpeter. Saltpeter is a necessary ingredient in bombs, and the only things that drop saltpeter are knights and templars. That's the only way to get it. So unfortunately, sooner or later, you kind of are forced to fight them. So it's something that again, sooner or later you have to fight knights if you want those things. Nails you can get in other places to an extent, but the best source of them really are knights and templars. So in terms of getting these tier 2 loot caches, obviously the way you really want to go about it is you just want to find where they are first, and then you want to kind of go straight at them. You don't want to do a full clear of the entire area to deal with them. There's a lot of enemies all over the map that if you're just going for the loot caches, they really aren't necessary to take out. So I'll go ahead and take out whatever this is up here. Just a damned, okay. That's fine, I can take him out relatively easily. And I also recommend, if you're going to be going for loot caches or full clears or anything like that, bring probably 2 weapons. You shouldn't need 2 weapons, but I would bring them. But yeah, you can kind of see, this isn't really that much different from a tier 1 loot cache. In fact, I would argue that it's pretty much not any different. The only real difference between a tier 1 loot cache and a tier 2 loot cache is that you may have an easier time finding things that you need. Specifically, tin. You need tin ore in order to make bronze, which you're going to need for your leather pack that you're going to make eventually. So that would probably be one of the only reasons I would go for tier 2 loot caches, guys, is if you are in fact looking for tin to make your bronze, because it's really rare in a tier 1 zone. You're not going to get any in a tier 1 zone like 90% of the time. But yeah, so doing a full clear, guys, And I don't know how many more enemies are necessarily left for a full clear. I may go ahead and do a full clear here anyway. I am low on... I'm low on food, however, for that, so... The majority of the full clear, you kind of want to do what I'm doing right now, is you're just going to be kind of picking off enemies one at a time using sneak attacks as much as you possibly can. In order to kill them as quickly and as efficiently as you possibly can. And in this case, I killed a couple of enemies that kind of opened up a couple of resource nodes that I passed over previously. And, yep, I don't have that many hawberries, or hollyberries, rather. So I'll go ahead and take that, but... Obviously, you run into situations like this where the enemies are facing completely different directions. So, you know, you can sneak attack one, but you're not going to be able to sneak attack the other. There I went ahead and did double auto too quickly. So you see it will start up the animation very quickly, but it's kind of pointless. And I'm pretty sure that's a knight over to my left, isn't it? I heard... Yep, that sounded like a knight. I've played long enough that I can tell the difference between enemies just by the sounds that they make once you're close to them. Maybe a sign that I've played too much. But yeah, the full clear. I mean, you can full clear a tier 2 zone, and that obviously makes it a lot easier to grab all of the resources and grab all of the stuff in the loot cache. But obviously you can see, guys, I have the leather pack already. I'm already kind of beyond intermediate farming, and even with the leather pack, you can't grab all of the resources and grab the stuff from the loot caches. It's just not possible. There isn't enough inventory space. Maybe once we get the tier 3 pack, that might be possible. Maybe if I wasn't determined to bring back some wood, or I could spare a little bit of that stone, you know, then I could obviously grab other things. If I wasn't determined to bring back the saltpeter and the nails, I could possibly bring back other things. But you know, it is what it is. I like to bring back as many things as I possibly can, because they're all things that I need. Now, getting into the things that you need to pick up again, obviously with the one-handed sword, you need copper ingots, you need leather, and you need planks. So I've already brought back enough animal hides to turn into the 6 leather I need to replace the one-handed sword that I used up. Obviously, every one of these stacks of copper ore, it will get turned into 10 copper ingots. So I brought back 30 copper ingots with me, essentially, which is enough to make 3 of these one-handed swords. So I still did it reasonably efficiently with that one-handed sword. I used one, and I brought back enough copper at least to make 3 more. So, you know, that's, again, getting back to efficient farming. And then, as far as the other things that you might want to make later on, like the flanged maces, wire, huge thing. My buddy Hax and I kind of had a long debate / argument on Discord not that long ago about wire, and for him, I guess he pretty much lives in the tier 2 zones, I guess, right now, and he pretty much just does full clears all the time, and according to him, he gets plenty of wire from the loot caches. So if you want to do full clears all the time, then, I mean, you can. You will not, most likely, bring back as many berries and meat and stuff with you. You're going to end up using a lot more healing items than I did. Well, potentially at least. I had a lot of lag, so stutter step and double auto wasn't going to be working very well against that knight regardless, even if I did have like a flanged mace or something. So that kind of goes into that. But if you're going to be making this stuff, again, you're going to need leather, you're going to need copper. Leather really is a big deal. because the only way you get leather, you can get small amounts of processed leather in the loot caches, but it's really just going to be small amounts. Until you start doing tier 3 runs, you're only going to get 1 or 2 per loot cache, if it even is in the loot cache. So you really need to be getting as many animal hides as possible. Now, that's one of the great things about the tier 2 zone as opposed to the tier 1 zone. In the tier 1 zone, the only things that will spawn in the map itself, just, standing around, that will drop animal hides are wolves, bears, and the deer. Whereas in the tier 2 zone, you also have dire wolves that are spawned in the map, which can also drop you animal hides. So if you do go for full clears in tier 2 zones, one of the benefits, of course, will be that you will get a pretty good amount of animal hides for leather. Personally, I get plenty of leather when I do my tier 3 runs, which I will be making a guide for that later today, I believe. Hopefully, if I have the time. I'm actually getting a little close to running over my time, so I am going to quickly head back to my base here, and we will just quickly discuss making bronze. So as I said, one of the main reasons you would want to go for a tier 2 loot cache is because tin ore is much more common there than it is in a tier 1 loot cache. So obviously you need tin ore in order to make bronze, and I will quickly look at the recipe, and I'll go over kind of what making bronze entails. Bronze is not something that we use a lot of right now. It's not a necessary item to be used for the most part, but it is something that is used occasionally, and especially if you are using the tier 4 chest piece to unlock this second quick slot, then obviously it's going to be something that you use quite a bit. Mainly you would use that for the dungeon, probably, but other people, everybody has their own preferences on, how they want to use that. So, everybody's going to be using up that stuff at different rates. Now, in terms of the bronze, and, yeah, I have a couple extra planks there, okay. Bronze actually doesn't take very much in terms of the materials, the actual ore materials, and actually let me grab some tin ore real quick. I guess I'll go ahead and make 2, that'll work, yeah. I'm trying to figure out how much I want to use here. It doesn't actually use that much in terms of your actual ore materials. Actually, I probably have some copper. Yes, I have copper in here. Good. So, the recipe for bronze is just 1 copper ingot and 1 tin ore. So, ultimately, what does it cost to make bronze? Well, the 1 copper ingot is either going to be 2 copper ore or 4 copper shards, whichever you use. Most of the time it's going to be the copper ore, most likely. So it's essentially 2 copper ore plus 1 tin, which isn't that much, guys. The only thing that it really costs to make bronze is all of the wood. Obviously, you have to melt down the copper ingots into the copper ore into copper ingots. That takes a little bit of your wood. I pretty much exclusively use planks, but if you're trying to build up your base, if you're trying to make everything like level 2, then you're gonna probably run into a situation where you never have enough planks. You're trying to use planks for building, and you can't really use them for fuel. So, I understand if you only have wood, that's fine. This is the problem we run into, guys. As you can see, a bronze ingot takes 14 minutes in order to melt down. Now, it becomes a problem because wood logs themselves only burn for 2 minutes. That means if you want to make 1 bronze, you need to use, in addition to the 2 copper ore and the tin ore, you need to use 7 wood logs just to make 1 bronze ore. Now, if you want to do what I like to do, let me go grab the rest of my tin ore, actually. And if you're trying to make bronze in mass, which I have been doing a little bit of, I'll go over here. I think it's this chest. Yeah. This is kind of my temporary bronze chest. I'm going to move this at some point in the future. Yeah, you can see I've made a good amount of bronze. Most of that I plan to use for falchions later. But if you're trying to make a lot of bronze, like I am, so we're trying to make 20 bronze ingots. Every single one of those bronze ingots is going to take 14 minutes. Now, you multiply that by 10, and that is 140 minutes. Which, if you can't quickly convert that in your head, guys, that's 2 hours and 20 minutes for 10 bronze ingots. 10! Now, obviously, we're running both smelters right now here. So that's essentially 20 bronze ingots in 2 hours and 20 minutes. But for the full 20 bronze ingots to be made, that is 280 minutes. And that is just under 5 hours, guys. That is 20 minutes under 5 hours. So 4 hours and 40 minutes to make 20 bronze ingots, or 40 if you're using both of the smelters. The more important thing, though, guys, is that with wood, that's 7 logs per bronze ingot. So if you're making 20 bronze ingots, you need 140 wood. 140 wood to make 20 bronze ingots, guys. That's really the major thing with making bronze, is it requires a lot of wood. Now, obviously, if we turn that wood into planks, it lasts longer and you don't need as much wood. Planks only require... they don't require. They burn for 3 minutes rather than 2. And if I can turn on my other phone, I can very quickly give you the calculation on exactly how much you need. But, you know, they take 14 minutes, so if the planks burn for 3 minutes, then you have 5 planks per bronze ingot with 1 minute of fuel of burning time left over. So essentially, guys, you're going to require 5 planks per bronze ore, with a little bit of remainder. So just to give you a rough idea, then, obviously, if you're going to make 20 bronze ingots, you're going to need 100 planks. So, the expensive part, guys, of making bronze isn't actually getting the copper or the tin, it's actually getting the wood. And it is why I constantly tell people in my beginner's guide, go get wood. You need wood. You need a lot of wood. You can see I've got a pretty large base here, and most of it is level 2 or level 3. Obviously, I've done a lot of farming. I've been farming in this game since, what was it, mid-March I started? Yeah, about mid-March. So, I've been farming for several months to get all of this stuff. And obviously, I don't have a huge supply of planks. I do have a lot of wood. I tend to try and make sure I have multiple chests of wood at any one given time, so that I always have wood processing into planks. But yeah, I don't have a tremendous amount of planks right now, but yeah, the wood cost is what really makes bronze super expensive to make right now. Hopefully, at some point, we will get a equivalent to charcoal in Last Day on Earth, which lasts for like twice as long as planks do, I believe. So that would be like something that would last for 6 minutes. So that would be amazing if we can make that. But am I really thirsty? Yes, I am a little thirsty. Okay, I can go grab some water real quick. But yeah, that's kind of why bronze is not really something that is really a sustainable resource to use in the dungeons or in farming much. It's just because it requires so much time to melt it down, and you have to do so many wood runs in order to have the fuel to melt it down. That's a little bit ridiculous. So, again, the end of Intermediate, Intermediate gameplay I kind of define as getting to level 55, so you can get this leather pack. It's also getting to level 55 so you can make a bastard sword. That way, if you haven't been able to find or trade for a good 50 plus damage weapon, which is of course a bastard sword or a scimitar, then you can just make one. And you need a good 50 plus damage weapon, really, if you want to do tier 3 farming consistently. You can try to go to tier 3 and get lucky not having to fight a Templar, but most of the time you'll have to deal with the Templar. But yeah, this guide's kind of been going on a little bit, so I'll go ahead and end it here, guys. If you have any additional comments or questions, suggestions about how to farm, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Not just for me, but for anyone who happens to watch this video in the future. So, I mean, you know, anything that you have. Different people will do things differently. So, my guide, even though it's meant to work for most people, some people might have different methods that they find better. Even if that's the case, that's fine. As long as you find something that works for you, that's the most important thing. But yeah, I will hopefully be doing a guide on Tier 3 later tonight, and I will post that most likely the day after this comes out. So, until then guys, take care.